And just to clarify, so Queens and Prophets is in the title of the book. What relationship are you trying to imply here between the monarch or the noblewoman and the prophet?
I just happened to stumble across, the role of women in a particular type of woman who is, comes from a wealthy, noble background and tends to rule. Who is the last Near Eastern pretender to the Roman throne? It's a
Hmm.
woman.
Right.
Who was the first historical Arab Christian monarch in Arabia? It's a woman. Who was the first Muslim on record in the world? It's a woman.
So,
Female power, female divinity. After
right.
that, I look at, the men that kind of took over, Roman emperors, Persian shahs, and of course the Arab caliphs squashing female rule and agency in the public sphere.
Mhm.
And that story is just fascinating.
So, hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Book Café Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Nizam, and in today's episode, we will be talking about the book entitled Queens and Prophets: How Arabian Noblewomen and Holy Men Shaped Paganism, Christianity, and Islam. And my conversation partner for this episode is somebody who needs absolutely no introduction. For those of you who have been with the show for a while now, will instantly recognize Professor Dr. Emran El-Badawi from episode 11, where we spoke about his other book, The Quran and the Aramaic Gospel Traditions. So definitely do check out that episode after you've watched or listened to this episode. But as far as today goes, let me first do my due diligence by welcoming back Professor Dr. Emran El-Badawi. Hi, Imran. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Omar, and thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Hmm. Absolutely. It's really great to see you. So just coming back to our discussion for today. So Queens and Prophets. First, let me just start off by saying that I'd really like to congratulate you first and foremost for writing a book about this, which puts a spotlight on the forgotten women of pre-Islamic Arabia, or pagan Arabia or Christian Arabia. But I am getting a bit ahead of myself. So first, let me just ask, why now? I would have assumed that this was something that perhaps other academics would have also spoken about or written about in the years gone by. But is this really the first book of its kind? Maybe we can just start from there. Yeah.
Well, every academic and artist and author wants to feel that they are sort of one of a kind and first.
Hmm.
And in all truth, every original product is new. It's an original contribution. But I also don't want to give myself too much credit. It's really kind of an accident of, as a researcher, you ask questions and then you also change your mind based on the evidence that you find, experiences that you have, and also corrections to your own assumptions. So all of those things were happening to me, maybe close to the pandemic, slightly before. I was doing lots of research looking especially at holy men in Arabia, interested in looking at the transition, how does it transition from majority pagan to majority, monotheistic, the things that me and my colleagues are working on. There's lots of scholarship again. Gabriel Reynolds, who you have on the show, of course,
Hmm.
Ilka Lindstedt, others. So I was doing that, and I just happened to stumble across, the role of women in a particular type of woman who is, comes from a wealthy, noble background and tends to rule. And I'm like, oh well, no one's sort of put these stories together. So on a personal level, that's what happened with me is I had to kind of pivot. I
Hmm.
had to sort of pause my work on looking at the men so I could focus more on the women.
Hmm.
And on a personal level, that's what happened. I have described it kind of as an happy accident and
Hmm.
stumbling across really great women, sort of tripping over these giants.
Right.
Um,
So, in other words, it was very serendipitous. And yeah, I think that the world is all the more, better for you having written this book, because I know that from my interactions with you over the years that you are a feminist, and my wife and I are both staunch feminists. And so it came as a very pleasant surprise when I read the book that, finally we have something that we can call our own. And yes, so we definitely have to get into the weeds as well, because there's so many interesting stories about these women that we had no knowledge of. And after having read about their, life histories, it really does make us think as to how they were so blatantly erased. But just before we jump ahead, in the book you mentioned that you were bemoaning the paucity of sources because they're so scant. But by my count, the book is in excess of 300 pages. So at the end of it all, did you find that the sources were actually very scant, or were you able to scrape up enough or mine enough of these stories to be able to put together the book? So tell us about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, and I will reveal to you now. I do lots of these podcasts. I'll reveal to you sort of an answer I haven't shared with anyone else.
Hmm.
Um, I had lunch one day with Robert Hoyland in
Hmm.
New York City. And Robert Hoyland is,
Right.
he's the author of many works
Hmm.
pertaining to Arabia and the Near East. I consider him one of my shuyukh. He's a teacher of mine. I've been reading his stuff since I was in grad school. And I remember presenting to him this idea. I'm like, I want to write this big book. I didn't have an idea of a trilogy at the time. I just said one book on, the role of especially, female agency and women in pre-Islamic Arabia. And he posed to me, this is sort of, a really important intellect and a storied academic, prolific scholar. And he said, I don't think you have enough material. He goes, I don't think you have enough evidence to even produce a book.
Hmm.
And I never told anyone about this story, but I took that as a personal challenge. I said,
Hmm.
"You have no idea how much notes I have on my computer right now, right?" And so I guess the answer is it's a little bit complicated. On the one hand, we have folks like Ahmed Jalad who travel every summer, and he's always digging up. Again, but what do you produce? You produce such small texts. Yes, they're
Hmm.
pregnant with meaning, but they're so meager. So that's on the one hand, yes, there's very little documentary evidence. On the other hand, there's an avalanche of literary sources in Arabic and
Hmm.
Syriac, Greek, right? To some extent, later on, of course, you have Ethiopic, Persian, right? Coptic. So the good scholar has to balance reading almost literally, so to speak, the scratches on the rocks, which come from, ancient times, with an imaginative rereading, a sort of re-looking at the literary sources, and you put those two together, and actually, there's quite a lot of material.
Hmm.
And I would say that the problem again with maybe some of my colleagues and even some folks in the field is they just feel like it's a lost case. Oh, the Jahiliyyah, right?
Hmm.
The pre-Islamic Arabia is this big black hole, nothing happened there. And we suspect some things here and there. No, there's actually a lot more there than we anticipated. And the more we dig up sources from the ground and we reread the literary sources, we start to discover that women actually were quite active. And as I make the case in the book, they've actually been written out. So it's actually an effort to actually remove
Hmm.
them from history.
Right.
So all of these things together made this project so big. There's so much to say,
Hmm.
and we just haven't been looking, and hopefully now we are.
Hmm. Indeed. So who am I kidding? It's not just 300 pages. This is the first book of an ongoing trilogy, and your second book, Female Divinity in the Quran, also goes up to about 250 pages. I'm sure Professor Hoyland must have regretted saying what he did to you before you started on this. So yeah.
And just to clarify, he is a great advocate and hero. He was the first one and he supported my work throughout with
Hmm.
the publisher, so I'm
Hmm.
indebted to him.
Okay, fantastic. So, coming to the main characters of the book, Imran, can you please tell us how you came? So, the main characters of the book, I found it to be extremely interesting. But how did you select who was going to make it into the book and whose story was going to maybe take a back seat? It must not have been easy, given that now you've mentioned that there was in fact a lot of resources to draw upon. So, tell us about that. How did you pick your main characters? Yeah.
Yes, so for Queens and Prophets, the book is divided into three parts.
Hmm.
And the first part really looks at just a long history of queenship in North Arabia. Regents, heads of state, chieftains, all of whom are women. One is Zenobia, in Arabic,
Hmm.
Zabba, right, or Zenobia. And then the second one is Mawia or Mavia of Tanukh, much less known character. Not a lot of people know about her. And the third one, of course, is Khadijah bint Khuwaylid of Mecca. Khadijah, that is
Hmm.
the Prophet Muhammad's first wife.
Hmm.
You're talking about, in the case of Zenobia, who was the last Near Eastern pretender to the Roman throne? It's a
Hmm.
woman.
Right.
Who was the first historical Arab Christian monarch in Arabia? It's a woman.
Hmm.
Who was the first Muslim on record in the world? It's a woman.
It's one.
So all these things sort of just come together. You have evidence. You have, wow, bam, these are really important world historical figures. And then you string together the stories of how all these three women transitioned the entire sort of Near East through Arabia, right? From a kind of multifaceted, highly complex, interreligious, multicultural context to a more Abrahamic, set of traditions.
Hmm.
And that story is just fascinating. So I think that I just dedicated a lot of time, but they were so fascinating. There was so much material that the story ended up really telling itself, and they're all connected.
Hmm.
And after
Right.
that, I look at, the men that kind of took over, whether
Right.
we're talking about Roman emperors or pardon me, or Persian shahs, and of course the Arab caliphs, and that just really just, in my opinion, squashing female rule and agency in the public sphere to such a large extent. There still are luminaries, and again, some of them are going to come out in the third book
Hmm.
in the early Islamic period. Again, there's amazing women never cease even
Hmm.
until today. Um, but yeah, okay, so that was a prolonged.
Yeah, no worries. And just to clarify, so Queens and Prophets is in the title of the book. What relationship are you trying to imply here between the monarch or the noblewoman and the prophet? So tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So what I'm arguing in the book is that these women, who I've named already, exercise their power,
Hmm.
especially their power to sort of rule, conduct trade, wars, etc., as monarchs, as the head of state. But the way they ruled in some cases, and maybe other historians can look more into this, I would say is quite different than the way men would rule. And what I'm arguing is that there was a lot of delegation to a kind of wingman, a kind of
Hmm.
right-hand man. So in the case
Right.
of Zenobia, Paul of Samosata, who is, a famous heretic.
Hmm.
Again, these phrases, which again, I sort of undermine, question in the book itself. He is a holy man who Zenobia entrusts with various things. Now, she has also a council of men who, again, if we get into it's fascinating how she rules,
Hmm.
and how her prototype is taken by other women later on, including the Queen of Sheba. If you want, we can talk about that
Yeah.
later.
Hmm.
But then even the second one, Mavia, right, who is really sort of this rugged chieftain. She is a warrior.
Hmm.
She's someone who she's out there to fight, and she fought the Romans and beat them every time. She delegated also the advocacy of the Arab peoples that she ruled to a Moses of Sinai, and
Hmm.
not that Moses that people know from the Bible, a
Hmm.
different Moses.
It's a different one. Yeah.
Um, and uh, and he is really the one who converted the masses to Christianity.
Hmm.
There's some other folks again, fourth, fifth century, where that's really the tipping point where Arabia starts to flip from towards Christianity. And then, of course, in the case of Khadijah, one argument I've made, it makes some people uncomfortable, but I don't think it
Hmm.
should,
Yeah.
which is that, she really shaped Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam.
Hmm.
It's not the other way around.
Yeah. 100%.
And I think that is really important. And people, if you go deep into the book, I mean, it's without Khadijah, there is no Muhammad.
Hmm.
And I mean, all the way down to the level of religion and God and seeing the world in what would later on become sort of an Islamic worldview. That's because of Khadijah. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So without Khadija, there is no Muhammad. I think that's really poetically said. And I was going to touch upon Khadija sometime later on during this episode, but since you've already brought her up, let's stick with her for a little bit. So you make an argument in the book that it was in fact Khadija who was supporting the Prophet Muhammad both financially as well as a protector. And later on in the sources, her role was usurped or perhaps downplayed, and Abu Talib's role was elevated. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about why you feel that this was the case and why we have to be a bit sus when it comes to the tradition. Yeah.
oh yeah, I mean, I go into this quite a bit in the book, but one argument that I make is that you have a world transforming individual, right? Muhammad the Prophet. And he's not alone. In order to succeed in this world, he needed support. And, it was a difficult time to speak to God, quite frankly. And he had two allies early in his life. One is his uncle Abu Talib, and the second one, or the other one, is his wife Khadijah. And I'm arguing every step of the way that it's his wife,
Hmm.
an older, wealthy woman, for so many reasons that we get from just the literature itself, right? We don't
Yeah.
have any epigraphic evidence of Khadijah. It's all from the
Mm.
sources later on. She was the one who protected him, sort of on the day to day.
Hmm.
She was the one who was his best friend for the longest period of his entire life. She was the one who, where they had where she and Muhammad had a healthy monogamous marriage,
Hmm.
and that's not the case afterwards, right? Where things become a little bit more unclear. And she's the one, again, her family, including basically the Abd al-Uzza,
Hmm.
Fakhd Abd al-Uzza, right? They are the ones who um, bring, I argue, the world of, they represent the Hanif and Christian world in Mecca during that time, if we read the sources, if we believe the sources.
Hmm.
So I'm qualifying what I'm saying. And also, if we read the sources, what's the alternative? I mean, you look at Abu Talib, who's his uncle. He's poor,
Hmm.
impatient. He's like, you know what? I can't pay you anymore. Why don't you go work for that wealthy woman out there? And he's frustrated because, his nephew is entering this world where Hanifism and Christianity and now Islam is taking over his worldview, and is really rather kind of absent. And the background of the Abd Manaf, Fakht Abd Manaf, right? No, pardon me. Yes, I think so. That side of the family, Muhammad's family, basically is all pagan. And I
Hmm.
mean pagan, like old-fashioned pagan. Like they don't, they're not into, trying to reconcile until later on. If you put these things together, it's like this is like a no-brainer. Why, you have a woman who is standing by her man, who is actually shaping her man, and then you have an uncle who is sort of an old, a grumbling old man, God love him,
Hmm.
but who didn't play a role day to day. And yet the tradition plays up Abu Talib, and there's all this poetry about him passing, and he was like the protector. He was none of these things, right?
Hmm.
So we have to read the sources very critically when it comes to assessing Muhammad's relationship with, the sort of yin and yang of his life, the people who got him through. Even if we
Hmm.
take Waraq ibn Nawfal, it's not a historical name, but it's probably a historical character that comes from Khadijah's side.
Hmm.
All the good monotheistic stuff comes from Khadijah,
Hmm.
and all the stubborn, antagonistic, masculine stuff comes from Abu Talib's side. And Abu Talib was, again, he was one of his advocates, but he was nowhere near as important as Khadijah. And I think that his role has been sort of distorted towards the positive. I would say there's all sorts of biases in there when it comes to either gender or even clan and tribal affiliations that should be corrected.
Right. And just in that answer, Imran, there's a couple of tangential questions that popped in mind, and let's go through a couple of them. So, with regards to Khadijah and her own background, do scholars speculate that perhaps she did come from a Christian background, and given the fact that when the Prophet Muhammad got his first call to prophethood, she did take him to see Waraka ibn Nawfal, who was, as per the sources, if we believe them, a committed Christian.
So, yeah, I'm not the first person to publish about the Christian background of Khadijah.
Hmm.
There are, I think Joseph Azzi, there are other folks, Khalil Abdul Karim, especially in Arabic. There's, people said some of the things that I've said and got completely trampled in line. Nobody cared.
Mm. Yeah.
It shows you the sheer power of tradition and lack of critical thinking.
Hmm.
That I am not the first person to say these things, and when people hear it, they're kind of startled or they ignore it entirely. So other people have written to varying degrees about the Christian background of Khadijah.
Mhm.
And to what extent did this shape Muhammad's worldview? And we don't know for sure. So again, I'm just going to make an argument. Other people make an argument, and لكل مجتهد نصيب. Every mujtahid can get his or her reward. I may be right, I may be wrong, but it's there. That's what the sources say. And I go again very deep in the book, in terms of how Muhammad got married and
Mhm.
Khadijah's role, paying the dowry. First of all, asking for his hand in marriage, paying the dowry. Everything, the entire marriage story between Muhammad and Khadijah, pardon me, Khadijah and Muhammad, contravenes Islamic tradition like 100%.
Mhm.
And people are okay with it. If they're okay with it, that's fine. I'm just going to tell you what our tradition says. You can do something else,
Mhm.
and I will think critically about it. So,
Right.
I hope others do as well.
Yeah.
But I'm not the only one. And at the same time, I'm cognizant that I don't want to go too far. There's no evidence that Khadijah herself personally was Christian.
Mhm.
There is literary evidence coming later that she came from a Christian background. Her blood relatives were either Christian or Hanif. So there's a monotheistic background there. And that much I think we can say tentatively. But people should welcome it. And I put on my Muslim hat. I think believers should welcome
Mm. Yeah,
a
of
more
course.
critical understanding. It doesn't affect the story in any negative
Of
way.
course, yeah. And if I can just jump in and say one more thing. The Prophet's wife, Maria, she was Coptic Christian, albeit that he had a relationship with her way down the line into his prophethood. But it's not controversial to call Maria a Coptic Christian, but somehow Khadijah calling her a Christian or giving the opinion that she had a Christian background is controversial. So do you find that to be a little hypocritical when it
Yeah,
comes from the three of
you
us?
bring a good point. Maria al-Qibtiyya, right? I mean, again,
Mm,
to what extent do we believe all these stories? Again, the list of women in the sources that Muhammad should have, the Prophet Muhammad, either had a marriage with, was sort of betrothed to, had a
mhm,
written contract that was never even, realized. That list is long. And
mhm.
again, the sources try to show, how the Prophet was making alliances and, on how other tribes are sort of, connected to the Prophet. It's a mark of honor. So you got to be critical there as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just, there's nothing wrong with that. You know
Of course. And with that answer, I'm quite sure we must have just broken the internet. But
what I mean?
let's move on to another character from the book. So the Queen of Sheba, I think she's one of the most well-known characters within the biblical and Quranic world. And as per my understanding, she probably lived about 1,000 years before Jesus. But and you also lament the fact that she hasn't been well attested to in the historical sources. But that's also true for David and Solomon and for all the characters from that time period. Wouldn't you say so? Yeah.
Yes. So the figure of the Queen of Sheba, or, just Malikat Saba, Bilqis,
Mhm.
names were,
Yeah.
just to clarify, in the Quran, the only sort of unnamed woman ruler is, I mean, the only woman who rules is the Queen of Sheba, and she's unnamed.
Hmm.
And that is a sort of, you can telescope the different um, um, stories and traditions that it goes through just to get to the Quran. And after the Quran, it goes even there are other traditions that build upon it. Um, I forget your question now.
No, so my question was that the Queen of Sheba, she is not well attested to in the historical sources, but
Oh,
that's also true for David and Solomon. But regardless of that, the point that I found to be very interesting in the book is that it's actually North Arabians who had female monarchs, but she's supposed to come from the south. So what's that all about?
yeah. So what I argue in there, and I'm not the first one as well.
Hmm.
Pardon me. What I argue is that the figure of the Queen of Sheba in its biblical form, whenever it was written, this is
Hmm.
prior, of course, it's in the Hebrew Bible, so it's pretty early.
Hmm.
It's not based on a South Arabian woman monarch, but
Hmm.
on a North Arabian. Because if you're whatever, the Kingdom of Israel or Palestine or Judah, you're in the north. You're
Right.
far in the north.
Yeah.
And there are lots of Arabic speakers, Arabian related peoples in the north. And in the south, especially, in ancient times, that's not so well attested. I mean, again, that's, one can argue where did the Arabs come from and stuff like that, but I would say the north.
Hmm.
So and I'm not the first one to say this, but this is a figure that has been put together by good storytellers based on queens in the north.
Mhm.
And in the south, the connections would probably have to do with, the Romans are the ones who really connect Arabia with itself. Whether it's Pliny or other sort of geographers, and they make Arabia all one big thing, based especially on trade and on seafaring. So the queen up in, potentially, east of the Jordan River, or, in the kingdom of Qadar, or whatever the ancient kingdom was at the time, was the queen of like all Arabia. But it's unlikely that she comes from the south. In my opinion, it's got to be the north.
Indeed. And, staying with the Queen of Sheba, I mean, her story in the Quran and perhaps even in the Bible as well, it never really sat well with me in the sense that it seems like it's not so much about a female monarch submitting herself to God, but rather it is the story of a female monarch submitting herself to another male monarch. So is that, and this is the kind of reading that I kind of started thinking more about after we had done an episode with Professor Dr. David Penchansky, who wrote a fabulous book called Solomon and the Ant, and he's also very well known to you. And he said during that episode that King Solomon was a complete jerk. So, you have to applaud the professor's humor. But do you feel that this is the correct interpretation that Dr. Penchansky has also put forth in his book, as well as, I seem to be reading everything through that particular lens of gender. But how would you look at it, Imran? Please tell us about that.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating, and again, the conversation with you and Dr. Penchansky, it's just such it all comes together quite nicely. And again, it's something where, as believers reading a scripture, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, etc., I admonish everyone, really, I beseech you all. These are all flawed characters. The Quran even, and Gabriel has published about this, Reynolds, that, the flawed nature, again, of prophets and so on and so forth in the Quran. At least he's presented that at conferences. But, that's something we should take seriously. And even in Surah 27, the ants, right? Surah An-Naml, it also didn't sit well with me. I'm like, why is this guy so mean? Why does he want to, punish the hoopoe bird? Why is he so, laughing at the ants because they're worried that he's going to crush them with his army? I'm like, and then when he meets the queen, he's so terrible. And as I've said in other shows as well, it's, even within the Quran, you have this rebuke, I would say, in the voice of a woman saying, "Innal muluk idha dakhalu al-ard afsaduha." Indeed, when the kings enter the land, they utterly ruin it. This is a woman, bewailing to the world. This is what men do to the world, that they ruin the world. And that's in the Quran. So I would say we can accept that, there are, great leaders and King David and Solomon, et cetera, et cetera. I would say, in a more of an archetype, again, there's no archaeological or epigraphic evidence, again, of them. We can accept that we have heroes and that they're flawed, to say the least. And I may not, I may have my own opinions about these things, but that to me, especially Surah 27, if we give it some critical thinking, you could come up with very different conclusions than the Mufassirun do. But it's also about the role of women standing up for good governance and men ruining everything.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And I think that the Hadith tradition takes it even further by saying, if I'm not mistaken, that a country or a kingdom ruled by a woman will never prosper. And it's I think it's quite miraculous that in Muslim majority countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, we still manage to elect women leaders despite all these this opposition from tradition. So yeah, kudos to all of the women who were elected to the premiership. By the way, which is something that we still haven't seen here in the United States, right? So we're still waiting for that first female president. So, but political dynasties aside, Let me just ask another question, and this is with regards to pre-Islamic Arabia and Ibn Kalbi's Book of Idols. I'm not very familiar with the book, Emran. Would you be able to tell us just very briefly what Ibn Kalbi's Book of Idols is about and what exactly is mentioned there, and then we'll proceed along that line. Yeah.
It's an interesting book. It's a fascinating read. He introduces, pre-Islamic Arabia, and he lists almost like biographies, a couple of dozen gods and goddesses, mainly centered around the Mecca, Hijaz area, but elsewhere in Arabia, going up to Sham and Yemen and other things like that, the Syria and Yemen. People don't know anymore what pre-Islamic Arabia is. So when he's talking about, Hubal or Allat, Manat, Uzza, he's talking about,
Sorry, let me just jump in here, Imran. And those are the three names that I was looking for: Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. These are pre-Islamic Arabian goddesses, deities that are mentioned in the book of Ibn al-Kalbi. But as far as I understand from our previous discussions, that post the year 500, there are no more pagan inscriptions that have been dug up. So what are these three names of the goddesses doing in the Quran in a milieu where there's not supposed to be any pagan gods at all? So tell us about that.
Okay. So that is much more complicated. I will finish the easier part and I'll get to the complicated part. I'll say that, within Ibn al-Kalbi's Kitab al-Asnam, he lists all these deities, and by the time he's writing it, it's centuries between him. I mean, if he's writing, let's just say 800, and the last time that people were at least writing down that they worshipped or they venerated these supreme deities or higher beings was 400. I mean, that's 400 years ago. Think about us right now and 400 years ago. If I had to write about 400 years, I have no idea. There was no recollection anymore. So the depth of knowledge and narrative history and mythology and the interconnectedness of these gods completely gone. So it's almost like just him, he's reading like, stickers or, he didn't have firsthand knowledge. So now to jump to the Quran, what on earth, right, are these ancient names doing in the Quran? The Quran is a bewildering, beautiful text, right? If it's the year 600, 610, 632, 656 at the latest, right? Why are we seeing Allat, Manat, Uzza? People have been converting to Christianity for over 200 years, 300 years at least. We shouldn't see anything like this anymore. Why are we seeing these pagan names? And on the one hand, in the Quran, the God or the speaker is addressing monotheistic audiences. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, ya ahl al-kitab. These phrases occur dozens of times. But then there's like this once or twice. It's once where it refers to the three goddesses in Surah 53. In Surah Nuh, it refers to the other five South Arabian deities. So I would argue that the Quran is recollecting for polemical purposes. It is playing up Arabia's pagan past to sort of attack theologically. Oh, you're misbehaving. You Christians and Jews who are continuing to venerate these gods like angels or intermediaries. I think that's sort of what's happening. Again, some of this is still being molded based on scholarship and evidence, but it's people. There's no church of Allat, Manat, Uzza. It doesn't.
Okay.
And some people argue again, like you'll have folks, Aziz al-Azma, who really do argue for the pagan reservation of
Right.
Mecca and Hijaz, that it's really a backwater. I'm not so sure if it's that extreme. So it's Hijaz especially, but Arabia is an interesting mix of sort of this Christian, layer over, that's overlaid a complex pagan past, and people are continuing to venerate the jinn and the angels and other people. So we're still developing this area of scholarship. So I don't have a final answer.
No worries. We'll take your answer as it is, and a lot of tangential questions that I wish I could take this in so many different directions. But let me just stick to the question that I did have. Allat, Al-Uzzat, and Manat. So this is a tripartite formula, and this is something that seems very ubiquitous in the ancient world. So I listed a couple of more. So Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva from the Hindu tradition, Father, Son, Holy Ghost from the Christian tradition. In Islam, we have the Basmala, Allah, Rahman, and Rahim, and maybe the heterodox Quranic Trinity, Father, Mother, and Son. Maybe Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So what is up with the tripartite formula, and why is it so prevalent in the ancient world? So we need to have an understanding of that.
Yes, I think here we're going to the territory of the second book, which is female divinity in the Quran, which is okay. I'll answer. I mean, the tripartite nature. First of all, within the Quran, the tripartite structures in the Quran has been visited by uh, other colleagues. So, I mean, I think Manfred Kropp and other German scholars have looked into this. I've looked into it before, and in the case of the second book, female divinity in the Quran, I go in depth into why this is the case, and I argue that all human beings, right, really within civilization, certainly within the ancient Near East and the late antique Near East, would access the divine in this tripartite manner, this tripartite formula. It doesn't matter if monotheistic, polytheistic, it doesn't matter, right? They're going to do it. So I go into depth over there, and your question is sort of like, why is it that human beings do this? And I'll read a little bit actually from page 111 in the second book. The origins of divine triads have been the subject of much examination and speculation by anthropologists. The range of conjecture postulates as their origin: one, the supremacy of the three stages of the sun to the human imagination; two, the agricultural cycle of life, death, and rebirth; three, the divine couple and child; and four, the triple goddesses originated in the three stages of the moon, and Trinitarian deities were frequently syncretic and heterogeneous in nature. So it's kind of a combination of, the celestial with the terrestrial, the agricultural with the sort of, the astral looking, and there's a very famous ancient triad of the sun, moon, and Venus in South Arabia, which is very famous, and it goes back again to the King Solomon. He was like, we found that there's this woman who is, worshiping the sun, moon, and etc. That's actually true. So I would
Yeah.
just say that this goes back into just, I think, part of
Okay.
our evolutionary history.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And now I remember that it was in the second book, but it's been about a year since I read it, so I totally forgotten about it. But can you tell us a bit more about the three goddesses, Imran, with regards to their presence in pre-Islamic Arabia? What kind of, I mean, do we have anything at all about who they were as perhaps human beings who later became deified? I think you also mentioned in the book that I think Allat was the most attested of the three goddesses, but the other two perhaps not as much so. So perhaps you could tell us a bit more about that. Yeah.
Allat is the most widely attested deity, male or female, in ancient Arabia. And her analog, her predecessor, so Ishtar or Inanna in the ancient Near East, originating in Mesopotamia, but really covering the ancient Near East, is the most widely attested deity, male or female, in the I would say the ancient Near East, but certainly in ancient Mesopotamia. That in and of itself deserves some pause. The fact that ancient people, whether it's Arabia or the Near Eastern context, were worshiping Allat more than anyone else. Again, I know that, there's some argument to be made. Okay, this is attestation. This is not necessarily sort of cultic veneration. Fine. But it has to count for a whole lot since we're obsessed with extrapolating information from text anyway. If we extrapolate, again, if we're not mining, but we're actually thinking critically, this has to mean something. Why is the veneration, or at least the recording of female deities, super important, and then it just disappears, right? It gets sort of wiped over. In the case of Allat, again, it's connected to the cult of Venus and the morning and evening star. And one argument that I make I can't remember which book now, right? I think it's the female divinity book. But in Surah Ar-Rahman, it says, An-Najm wa-shajaru yasjudan, that the star, Venus, and a shajar, whatever tree, lot tree, or whatever tree is on earth, prostrate to God. One Allat up in heaven, and Al-Uzza down on earth. Um, they are the cult of Allat and Al-Uzza are connected. And even in the verse, "Afaraytum Allat wal-Uzza," they're connected. They're genealogically connected. It goes into Arabian, Canaanitic, Aramaean, Mesopotamian history. It's all the same bunch of traditions interacting with each other. And divine female is the tree, which is obviously it's green and it's producing and it's fertile, and is also Venus. They're connected. Separate from this is Manat, genealogically distinct. Manat is similar to other, dumb forces of nature. Dumb in the sense like time, fate, death. And she, at some cases, gets associated with the moon. Again, everything has to have some sort of astral component. That's the way the Arabs they symbolize, everything. Everything had to have some sort of celestial symbol. So you've put these things together. They're not historical individuals that were worshipped. There is some argument you can make for other gods about that, but no, they are again the same thing that it's similar to the answer I gave you earlier. It's again looking at the celestial and looking at the terrestrial and extrapolating, anthropomorphizing that you have Allat, I would argue maybe just birth, Al-Uzza, power, life, right? And then Manat, death, the end of things.
Okay, so they weren't historical, but they're anthropomorphized. Okay, yeah. And speaking of, depicting people in positive lights and negative lights, and Abu Lahab and some of the other characters from the Prophet's milieu, I want to touch upon another female character that's also mentioned in the book, but perhaps it would be interesting for our audience to know a bit more about her. Hind Bint Utbah, aka the wife of Abu Sufyan, the arch nemesis of the Prophet Muhammad. What can you tell us about her and her evolution from being an arch nemesis to being a quote unquote good Muslim woman somewhere down the line?
Wow, Hind bint Utbah deserves her own book. Again, there are studies about her, but she deserves the kind of treatment that I think I've given the earlier three great women that we've talked about. According to the Islamic narrative, the literary sources which come afterwards, Hind bint Utbah is the wife of Abu Sufyan. She's she's a noblewoman. She's the daughter of Utbah, right? And these are the sort of building blocks of the Umayyad Empire later on. Staunch pagans in the sources. Vociferous enemies of Muhammad and Hamza and all the stories that we know. And I'll say two things about her. One, the story is that she's a staunch pagan, and then with time she sort of converts to Islam begrudgingly when Muhammad conquers Mecca, which he does. Of course, it's a bloodless conquest. He comes with I'm taking over, and everyone sort of surrenders. But that with time she actually starts. She's a warrior. She's depicted as a bloodthirsty warrior who, having killed Hamza and then, sort of assassinates him and then bites into cuts him up and bites into his liver.
Right.
That she takes all that bloodthirsty energy and then she starts fighting for Islam later on up in, the northern sphere. And then she sort of retires and then, becomes a good. It's anything is possible. Anything is possible. Is that possible? It is. But what I want to say earlier than that is that I argue in the third book, which is not yet out, that she is part of, again, this class of priestesses. A priestess is not one thing. Usually it's the ruling woman, the chieftain or the queen. She's the chief priestess.
Right.
She plays that role. And with what I call Arabia's battle song, there's a famous song, where she sings on the battlefield, نحن بنات طارق, what is it? سيوفنا صواعق ونجوم. It's like a beautiful battle song. She is that type. I'll mention one last thing. That Nadia al-Sheikh has a great book on women in Abbasid Arabia or the Abbasid world, and she uses Hind bint Utbah as the archetypical pre-Islamic woman, and she's right.
Okay, so just to stay with Hind and contrasting her with Zenobia, whom we see goes from being a heroine to being vilified in the Islamic tradition, whereas Hind goes in the opposite direction. So is this deliberately thematic that the only good woman is the Muslim woman, etc.? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, and I think that there's some truth to that.
Mm,
There's women who ruled before Islam, they're no good, or the women who ruled outside the Islamic sphere, they're sort of no good. But you have this really sort of bloodthirsty, powerful woman who converted to Islam. Oh, well, look at her, she's become a saint.
mm,
That also happens, by the way. People might get upset with me. You have the figure of Aisha, right? Aisha
mm,
bint Abi Bakr,
yeah.
another very important figure in Islamic history,
Mm,
who really is sort of this jealous wife and who's sort of has rebellious tendencies. And I, in the third book, again, go a little bit further. People may get a little bit uncomfortable, but she becomes, and again, after the passing of her husband, Muhammad the Prophet, she gets into a civil war with Ali. And I mean, it's like these people, hey, what's going on here?
mm,
She seems pretty harsh, but she's rehabilitated
mhm.
through the Islamic sources as a narrator of hadith. So she becomes a muhadditha rather than someone who is, marching in a civil war and a jealous wife and a rebel. She is a muhadditha. Her image is rehabilitated. And Nadia al-Sheikh and other scholars, women scholars, write about this, and they're right. And I think you're right as well.
Okay, yeah, of course, and we'll definitely check out that book at some point. Let's go off on another bit of a tangent, Imran, and this is with regards to a queen that you've mentioned in the book in passing, Queen Cleopatra. And of course, I remember that a couple of years back there was a lot of controversy with regards to her ethnic background. She's obviously a descendant of the Greek Ptolemaic, family. And would you like to make a comment about what kind of background she may have come from by the time we get from Ptolemy to the time of Jesus, 30 years prior to which she had passed away?
It's not really my area. I'll just say that I rely on the expertise of others,
Mhm.
and what you just said. I agree with. I have nothing really to add.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we'll skip over this then. So I'll say that at this point in time, I've pretty much exhausted all of my questions for the show, Imran, but I do have a surprise guest question for you, which is something that all of our guests tend to look forward to. And I regret to say I've only got one. So after which I promise to let you go. And so the surprise guest question comes from your very good friend, Professor Dr. Gabriel Said Reynolds, who wrote Christianity and the Quran, and we just did an episode with him. And his question to you is, Dear Imran, your excellent book, Queens and Prophets, forms a bridge between the worlds of late antique Arabia and early Islam. Some scholars argue that the Quran may privilege men over women, but at least it takes one step beyond Jahiliyyah society, which oppressed women severely. How does your research affect this argument?
Well, thanks to you and thanks to Gabriel for asking a very. He has a way of really making complex things simple, which is really a mark of a strong educator. Um, okay, so I get this question a lot. Um, you know, Dr. El-Badawi, you've published these books. What does that mean for the status of women in Arabia? And what did Islam do to the status of women? Because the argument, again, in sort of our nonchalant, everyday, pious believing is that Islam raised the status of women and made it better. Now, that's true in many cases, but then there's in other cases it's also true that women, there's no woman khalifa, women can't rule, women can't do certain things, which in my mind there's there's not a biological argument for it, for example, right? There's things that women can't do clearly. There are things that men can't do clearly, but there are some things that women have been prevented from doing, and Islam and the Quran sort of just contribute to that patriarchal world. Let me back up for a second and say this: two things. One, um, women in pre-Islamic Arabia, they did rule, they owned property, they dispensed with property, they, in some cases, had multiple male partners. They were represented in the mythology, the art, and the architecture. This is all before Islam, right? So,
Mhm,
and then Islam comes, and if we focus now, especially on the Quran, it regulates the relationships
mhm,
between men and women, and it limits, I would say, the autonomy of women when it comes to certain areas of public life, in the same way that Christianity and Judaism does. I mean, that's Islam really is the final edition, and it raises the status of it improves the status of women by protecting them in the Quran again. With looking at Surah An-Nisa, they're guaranteed a certain portion of inheritance, etc., etc. So it's kind of a nuanced answer. I will say that we have evidence for powerful women who did lots of amazing things. On the other hand, the late antique Arabian sphere was so marked by warfare, civil warfare, and the kind of warfare that is ripple effects from the Romans and the Persians. And you also have Hurub al-Fijar, which is the wars of apostasy, and the tradition of Ayyam al-Arab, where just lots and lots of war stories, that Arabia started to become more and more violent and unstable because of just men conquering for land and with one another for tribal reasons. That depleted and diminished the status of women on the eve of Islam. So it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Women had good status, but they were getting cut down because men were fighting war.
Right.
And so by the time the Quran came, it's guaranteeing them a share in this very, very patriarchal world. So it does a very good job of in this under a patriarchal umbrella of giving women a share. And if we're able to sort of walk and chew gum and study pre-Islamic Arabia, you can see that there are parts where women could do things and women couldn't do things, prior to the Quran. I know it's a convoluted answer, but it's still a little.
Not at all. We'll take it as it is. So maybe analogous to 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or somewhere thereabouts. Yeah, I agree with you on that completely. And so finally, Emran, let me end our episode by asking you that you've done a tremendous job in giving a voice to the voiceless women and the forgotten women of pre-Islamic Arabia. If the women in your book could have had agency over their own life and told their own stories, how do you reckon they would want to be remembered by history?
One is, I would say, I'm not qualified to answer because I'm not a woman, but honestly, I waited so long for someone else to write this book. I waited so long for any woman or man to just write, to connect the dots in this way. It never happened. So then I just did it. I think, in the case, I'll try to be precise. In the case of someone like Zenobia, she would have explained why she challenged Rome. In the case of, Mawia, maybe she would explain why she accepted or even tolerated Christianity and that she spread it among the Arab peoples. And, Khadeejah would have explained why she converted to Islam and believed in her husband in that way. That's all I can say. I would shudder to say more than that.
Okay, and I think that's really well said. And on that note, so let me just conclude by saying that for our viewers and listeners who have been with us all this time, thank you very much for staying till the end. Please be sure to get Professor Dr. Emran El-Badawi's book, the first of a planned trilogy. The book, once again, is Queens and Prophets: How Arabian Noblewomen and Holy Men Shaped Paganism, Christianity, and Islam. Emran El-Badawi, thank you so much for your time, sir. You've been a wonderful guest. I always enjoy talking to you, and this is a tremendous book. I really hope that everybody goes out there and gets it. And we of course need to have you back for your other book, Female Divinity in the Quran. And inshallah, we wish you Godspeed in getting your third book completed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.